Imagine a man so powerful that when the entire United States government was on the brink of bankruptcy, it didn't turn to a president or a general. It turned to him, locked inside a private library on Madison Avenue. He held the nation's greatest bankers hostage until they agreed to his terms. He was the Jupiter of Wall Street, a man who controlled 1/16 of America's railroads, created the world's first billion-dollar company, and hid a disfigured face behind a stare that could freeze a room. This is the story of J.P. Morgan, the man who didn't just save American capitalism, he owned it. Fast forward a century, and his shadow still looms. From the secret meeting at Jekyll Island that created the Federal Reserve, to a modern-day titan named Jamie Dimon, using J.P. Morgan's fortress balance sheet to stabilize the world in 2008 and 2023. But how did a sickly child from Connecticut build an empire that today trades railroads for AI-powered algorithms? His name, of course, is J.P. Morgan, revered and feared as the undisputed king of Wall Street, the man immortalized in history. As J.P. Morgan was born John Pierpont Morgan on April 17, 1837, in the quiet, respectable city of Hartford, Connecticut. His father was Junius Spencer Morgan, a formidable figure in his own right. The Morgan lineage stretched back to the earliest days of English colonization in New England, with an ancestor having set foot in Massachusetts in the 1630s, helping lay the foundations of a new world. Junius's father, Joseph Morgan, had moved to Hartford in 1817, seizing the boundless opportunities of a nascent American economy, still developing its immense potential in the decades following the Revolutionary War. Joseph was a man of keen financial acumen, quickly amassing substantial wealth through a diverse array of ventures, from land speculation to early industrial investments. He envisioned a similar path for his son, Junius, and in 1834, he leveraged his connections to secure the ambitious 21-year-old a coveted partnership with the prominent banker Morris Ketchum on New York's burgeoning Wall Street. However, the tumultuous political and economic climate of the mid-1830s, a period rife with uncertainty, prompted Junius to make a pragmatic detour. He temporarily set aside his banking aspirations, returning to Connecticut to work for a wholesale dry goods firm, Howe, Mather & Co. This proved to be a brief interlude, as he eventually returned to the banking industry in the 1850s, where his inherent talents truly flourished, leading to considerable success. Long before this, in May 1836, shortly after Junius joined Howe, Mather & Co., he married Juliet Pierpont. She was the daughter of the esteemed Boston clergyman and theologian, John Pierpont, a man renowned for his passionate advocacy of moral causes, including the temperance movement and the abolition of slavery ideals that would subtly but significantly influence his grandson. Born within a year of his parents' marriage, John Pierpont Morgan was the eldest of the family's 5 children. Over the next decade, Junius and Juliet would expand their family further, welcoming 3 daughters and another son. At the time of John's birth, the United States of America had only just crossed its half-century mark since gaining independence from Great Britain. It was a young republic still grappling with its identity and future. The nascent American Republic found itself deeply divided by 2 competing visions for its economic soul. On one side stood Alexander Hamilton's Federalist ideal, an integrated national manufacturing economy, robustly supported by a dynamic and centralized federal government. Opposing this was Thomas Jefferson's Republican vision, a self-sufficient agrarian economy, fundamentally rooted in the yeoman farmer and minimal federal intervention. These ideological schisms extended into foreign policy debates, with Hamiltonian Federalists often aligning with British interests, while Jeffersonian Republicans harbored sympathies for revolutionary France. Unresolved tensions and grievances between the United States and Britain ultimately erupted into the War of 1812. The young nation, despite the humiliating sacking and burning of Washington, D.C. by British forces in 1814, managed to survive and emerge with a strengthened sense of national identity. While the war undeniably ensured the extinction of the Federalist Party at the national level, it paradoxically forced Jefferson's protege, President James Madison, to confront the critical necessity of stronger federal institutions to safeguard American sovereignty. and promote stability, having allowed the charter of Hamilton's First Bank of the United States to expire controversially in 1811. Madison, witnessing firsthand the financial strains of wartime, authorized the formation of the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. This reestablishment aimed to ensure better, more reliable access to credit for the government and to stabilize the nation's currency. Madison's successor, James Monroe, placed significant emphasis on national infrastructure improvements, making them a cornerstone of his political agenda during the era of good feelings. Meanwhile, the eloquent Kentucky Congressman Henry Clay championed a grand American system, a vision for a national network of roads and canals, vital for linking the country's burgeoning regions, to be maintained by the federal government and prudently financed by a strong central bank. Clay ran for president in the famously acrimonious 1824 election, a contest so fragmented that none of the four major candidates secured an electoral college majority. Though unsuccessful himself, Clay wielded his considerable influence as Speaker of the House to engineer the election of John Quincy Adams, effectively denying the presidency to the frontrunner, Andrew Jackson, the populist war hero from Tennessee, who was widely seen as the people's choice. Thereafter, Clay vigorously sought to implement his ambitious economic agenda as Adams's Secretary of State, but he faced relentless Jacksonian opposition in Congress. Fueled by the lingering resentment of 1824, the 1830s thus witnessed the dramatic continuation of this power struggle between Jackson, a charismatic founder of the Democratic Party formed, in part, as a direct response to what he and his supporters considered the corrupt bargain that deprived him of the White House in 1824 and his entrenched opponents like Adams and Clay. Jackson would ultimately triumph, winning the election in 1828 and serving two consecutive, transformative terms. After securing his re-election in 1832, Jackson dedicated much of his second term to a relentless, personal war against the Second Bank of the United States. He fervently believed that the bank, a powerful, centralized entity, was a corrupt instrument fueling financial speculation that disproportionately enriched Northern capitalists and a moneyed elite, all at the expense of impoverished small farmers and common citizens in the South and West. Indeed, an era of cheap credit had undeniably fueled an explosion of speculative investment, particularly in land. This financial frenzy drove the rapid expansion of transportation links, pushing canals and railroads towards the Great Lakes and along the mighty Mississippi River. Consequently, land prices in newly developing regions like Illinois and Alabama soared to unsustainable heights, creating a classic economic bubble. However, while Jackson ultimately prevailed in his crusade against the bank in 1836, dismantling what he saw as an elitist institution, the smaller, unregulated state banks he favored only exacerbated the problem. They dramatically increased the circulation of paper money, inflating the land bubble even further until it spectacularly burst in July 1836. The catastrophic collapse of land values sent shockwaves through every sector of the economy, leading directly to a severe economic downturn famously known as the Panic of 1837. Just a couple of weeks after John's birth, his father, Junius, was compelled to travel south on a perilous mission to collect precarious debts for Howe, Mather & Co., the dry goods firm where he was then employed. While the company managed to weather the immediate economic panic, the ensuing depression, a protracted period of hardship, further exacerbated by the conservative fiscal policies of Jackson's successor, President Martin Van Buren, left an indelible mark on the Morgan family. It profoundly convinced them that America's enduring economic prosperity hinged upon the existence of a robust national bank, an institution capable of judiciously regulating markets and ensuring a stable flow of money. This conviction, born from a period of profound instability, formed a critical part of the broader political, financial, and banking environment against which young John Pierpont Morgan grew up, shaping his earliest perceptions of power and stability. Young John was, by all accounts, a sickly child, plagued by recurrent bouts of serious illness that, at times, led his family to genuinely fear for his life. Despite his fragile health, which necessitated frequent absences from school, the bright boy was often able to assist his grandfather Joseph with various domestic chores, perhaps imbibing early lessons in responsibility and self-sufficiency. The family's economic fortunes, battered by the Panic of 1837, began to steadily improve in the mid-1840s as the Depression gradually receded. In the autumn of 1846, the 9-year-old John was sent to the prestigious Episcopal Academy in Cheshire, strategically located between Hartford and New Haven. When he returned home just 3 months later for Christmas, tragedy struck. His beloved grandfather, Joseph Morgan, suffered a precipitous collapse in health. JP was profoundly affected by the death of his 67-year-old paternal grandfather in July 1847. He had shared an especially close bond with his paternal grandparents, finding both affection and early guidance in their home. Yet, he also cherished his vacations spent with his maternal grandfather, John Pierpont, the principled clergyman from whom he demonstrably inherited a strong, unwavering sense of moral purpose that would underpin his life. His father, Junius, however, was perhaps more keenly focused on equipping his eldest son with the practical skills necessary to thrive in the demanding commercial world that awaited him. In addition to providing John with a rigorous education in history, mathematics, and literature, Junius wisely delegated simple yet instructive tasks to him at Howe, Mather & Co. This firm, reflecting Junius's growing influence and partnership, changed its name to Mather, Morgan & Co. in 1850. That spring, Junius embarked on a significant 3-month journey to Britain, then unequivocally the foremost global superpower of the age. He chronicled his awe and fascination with its rich history and powerful institutions in a series of detailed letters to his young son. John, still in his early teens, responded to his father's extensive correspondence with updates of his own, dutifully reporting on the latest business and local affairs in Hartford, demonstrating an early aptitude for commerce. After his illuminating return home, Junius concluded that his burgeoning ambitions had simply outgrown the confines of Hartford. He dissolved his existing company and, in January 1851, forged a new partnership with a prominent Boston merchant, establishing JMBB Morgan & Co., a significant step up in the financial world. The family consequently moved to Boston in July, and John was enrolled at the esteemed Boston English High School. Here, he diligently applied himself to the study of mathematics, a foundational discipline in preparation for his eventual business career. In his essays, he penned thoughtful reflections on America's promising commercial future and passionately denounced the inhumanity of slavery. Yet, history holds a chilling irony. While young Pierpont wrote of slavery's inhumanity, an investigation by historian James Lyde later revealed a darker truth. 2 of the bank's predecessors, Citizens Bank and Canal Bank, had accepted approximately 13,000 slaves as collateral for loans, eventually owning over 200 human beings when plantation owners defaulted, a legacy the modern firm would later have to formally apologize for. However, unlike his staunchly abolitionist maternal grandfather, John's primary concern at this time was more pragmatic, the grave prospect of the Union fracturing over the contentious issue, rather than abolition itself, a reflection of a budding financier's concern for stability. In 1852, J.P. experienced another prolonged bout of ill health, a recurring challenge throughout his youth, which kept him from school for several weeks, rather than simply returning to his studies in the autumn. His concerned parents made the decisive choice to send him abroad, believing a change of climate and environment would be most effective in restoring his delicate health. On November 8th, he embarked on a transatlantic voyage, sailing for the remote Portuguese Azores Islands, which lay far-flung in the vast Atlantic Ocean. He was accompanied by the U.S. consul, Charles W. Dabney, a trusted family connection. As his health gradually recuperated amidst the island's tranquility, Pierpont spent much of his time at the bustling harbor, immersing himself in the intricacies of maritime commerce. He kept meticulous accounts of his expenses, a habit that underscored his innate organizational skills, and dispatched regular letters home with each passing vessel, updating his family on his progress. After 4 months, John was fully restored to robust health, but instead of immediately returning home to America, His parents had orchestrated a pivotal reunion, arranging to meet him in England. In early 1853, Junius Morgan had received an extraordinary offer to become a junior partner and, crucially, the designated heir to the illustrious American banker George Peabody's immensely influential firm in London, at a time when the American economy, during the 1840s, was characterized by both remarkable technological progress and unsettling financial instability. Peabody had earned an unparalleled reputation. He diligently worked to restore American creditworthiness in London, a crucial endeavor, by successfully persuading several state governments to honor and repay their defaulted loans, securing a handsome profit in the process. He was lauded for making consistently sound and profitable loans during the booming American railroad expansion, and had garnered the profound gratitude of American industrialists by financing American exhibits to the magnificent Great Exhibition in London in 1851, a global showcase of innovation. An unmarried man in his late 50s, Peabody was actively seeking a worthy successor to his burgeoning banking empire and had reached out to Junius after a strong recommendation from the latter's partner, J. M. Bibb. The Morgans arranged to meet with Peabody in London in May. In mid-April, John, filled with anticipation, left the Azores for England aboard the Great Western, Isambard Kingdom Brunel's pioneering and majestic steamship, a marvel of Victorian engineering. After a whirlwind, whistle-stop tour of London's major attractions, absorbing the grandeur of the imperial capital, he traveled north to Manchester to reunite with his parents, enjoying shopping excursions with his mother and accompanying his father to important business meetings, observing the dynamics of high finance firsthand. Although a bout of illness, a recurring theme in his early life, unfortunately prevented John from joining his parents at a momentous dinner with George Peabody in London on May 18th. In 1853, the discussions held that evening would, nevertheless, indelibly define the teenage boy's professional future. Peabody formally informed Junius of his ambitious plans to retire in precisely 10 years, after which the younger Morgan would not only inherit the esteemed firm, but also, crucially, the invaluable right to use Peabody's illustrious name and his substantial capital, a truly dynastic offer. Junius, ever the prudent financier, did not immediately accept this life-altering proposition. Instead, he requested a reasonable period to meticulously examine Peabody's intricate financial books and to tie up any remaining loose ends with his business affairs back in Boston. The Morgan family then embarked on a grand tour of the European continent, briefly passing through the picturesque Netherlands and the historic regions of Germany. They spent 2 weeks immersed in the vibrant culture of Paris, where young John, a keen student of history, visited the tomb of his great historical hero, Napoleon Bonaparte. During their stay, he even caught a fleeting glimpse of the great man's ambitious nephew, Napoleon III, who had only recently, through a coup, declared himself Emperor of the French. A fascinating intersection of past and present power. The Morgans returned to England in June and, shortly thereafter, sailed back to the United States in July. After a year's absence from formal schooling, John diligently rejoined his class at Boston English High School and quickly caught up on his studies, demonstrating remarkable academic resilience. George Peabody, keen to finalize the succession, made a second, more pressing approach to Junius, who, after due consideration, finally agreed to join him in the autumn of 1854. By then, Junius's son was in his final year at Boston English, and while he eagerly hoped to plunge straight into the world of business, Junius, with a broader vision for his son's international career, decided to send him to the European continent once more, this time specifically to master foreign languages essential for global commerce. The family departed for England in September, and the newly reconstituted firm of Peabody, Morgan & Co. formally began trading on October 2nd, 1854, marking the official start of a new, powerful Anglo-American banking partnership. A month later, the 17-year-old John left England for Vevey, a charming town in Switzerland, to commence his studies in French. On his journey, the earnest teenager was entrusted with a sensitive mission to deliver important diplomatic documents to Paris on behalf of the American ambassador in Britain, none other than James Buchanan, the future president of the United States an early taste of high-stakes responsibility. Although John initially struggled to fully integrate into his new school environment in Vevey, his natural aptitude and diligence soon shone through. He became remarkably proficient in French, mastering the language with an impressive speed, and finished at the very top of his class in the autumn of 1855. Junius, undoubtedly satisfied with his son's academic progress, sent him on to further his linguistic and intellectual development at Göttingen in Germany in early 1856. Here, Pierpont tackled German with similar determination, mastering the language within a year. His European education continued with a journey to Italy in early 1857, immersing himself in its rich cultural heritage, before he was finally recalled to London in July of that year. By this time, John had cultivated a profound desire to travel to China, a vast and enigmatic country that was slowly, albeit reluctantly, opening up to Westerners after more than 2 centuries of self-imposed isolation from the Western world. It was also around this period that he became increasingly known to his friends and family by his middle name, Pierpont, choosing to use it rather than John as his given name, a subtle yet significant assertion of his personal identity. Pierpont's adventurous desire to travel to China at the culmination of his European studies was, however, ultimately vetoed by his mother, Juliette. She had personally struggled to settle comfortably in London, finding it overwhelming, and had since returned to the United States, preferring the familiarity of home. Instead, Junius, ever the pragmatist, had arranged for his son to begin his professional career as a clerk at Duncan, Sherman & Co., a prominent banking firm in New York. Thus, Pierpont crossed the Atlantic once more, starting his new job in September 1857. He was initially unpaid, drawing instead from a generous $200 monthly allowance provided by his father to support himself. Despite the seemingly menial nature of copying the firm's extensive correspondence, this foundational experience offered Pierpont an invaluable, hands-on insight into the intricate workings of the banking business. Pierpont also diligently studied bookkeeping under the tutelage of accounting partner Charles H. Dabney, a cousin of the very U.S. consul who had accompanied him to the Azores. Furthermore, he served as a crucial agent for Peabody's burgeoning New York operations, seamlessly connecting the American and European branches of the family's financial interests. However, within mere weeks of commencing his banking career, Pierpont witnessed the dramatic, abrupt end of the booming 1850s economy. The cessation of the Crimean War in 1856 had triggered a significant global economic shift. Russian grain, previously withheld, returned to the international market, severely impacting American grain exports and agricultural profits. Concurrently, an increase in the Bank of England's interest rates lured investors to sell off their American assets, seeking higher and safer returns in London. The resultant sudden collapse in American markets left George Peabody's London firm struggling desperately to find the cash needed to meet its substantial payments to British creditors. The venerable firm only narrowly averted disaster with an emergency line of credit amounting to a colossal $800,000 from the Bank of England itself, highlighting the interconnectedness and fragility of global finance. Junius Morgan had been profoundly shaken by this harrowing experience, a near catastrophe that instilled in him a deeply conservative approach to lending thereafter. The Bank of England's timely and decisive intervention also solidified an existing belief within the Morgan family that the United States urgently needed its own powerful central bank to restore stability and confidence to the often chaotic private banking system during times of crisis, a foundational conviction that would later guide J.P. Morgan's own actions. Pierpont spent much of his time at Duncan, Sherman & Co., immersing himself in the complex financing of railroad companies, an industry expanding at enormous speed throughout the 1850s and 1860s as the country was being rapidly linked up by a vast network of rail lines. This work brought him into direct contact with influential railroad executives, such as William Henry Osborne, the dynamic president of the Illinois Central Railroad. During the summer of 1858, Pierpont began to court Amelia Sturgis, Osborne's sister-in-law. Her father, Jonathan Sturgis, was a well-respected figure and an early, significant investor in the Illinois Central, weaving together social connections with emerging industrial capital. When Junius Morgan was invited to call on the prominent Sturgis family during a visit to New York in late 1858, he was immediately charmed and delighted by Amelia. So impressed was he that he extended a gracious invitation for her to accompany him to London in February of the following year. After being given a grand tour of London by Junius himself, Amelia was joined by her family in the spring. Together, they embarked on an elaborate grand tour of the European continent, following a meticulously devised itinerary by Pierpont, who was obliged to remain in New York, diligently tending to his growing business responsibilities. By September 1859, Pierpont had completed 2 years of intensive work at Duncan, Sherman & Co., proving his capabilities. Junius, recognizing his son's readiness for greater challenges, decided it was time for a new phase in his career. In November, Pierpont traveled to London, both to see Amelia for the first time in 9 months and to engage in crucial discussions about his future with his father. Junius advised him to embark on an extensive tour of the southern United States, where Peabody's interests were significantly vested in the burgeoning railroads and the vital cotton trade. The sectional tensions over the issue of slavery between the North and South were, by this point, at a palpable breaking point, threatening to tear the nation asunder. Pierpont's presence in the South, his father shrewdly calculated, could offer invaluable market intelligence to Junius, who was now in effective control of Peabody & Co. Pierpont spent several weeks meticulously gathering intelligence on Southern markets in the bustling city of New Orleans, observing the economic pulse of a region on the brink. On his return journey to New York in April 1860, he made a pivotal stop in Charleston, South Carolina, to attend the Democratic Party convention. Since the Democrats had enjoyed a near monopoly on the presidency for 3 decades, Pierpont, like many, fully expected the next occupant of the White House to be a Democrat. Instead, the party was irreconcilably split over the incendiary issue of slavery, with Northern and Southern Democrats eventually choosing their own separate nominees. With the Democratic vote fatally fractured, the recently formed Republican Party and their relatively unknown presidential candidate, Abraham Lincoln, triumphantly won the November 1860 election. Lincoln's firm opposition to any further expansion of slavery served as the immediate catalyst, leading a host of Southern states to declare their secession from the Union starting in December 1860. By April 1861, the United States was irrevocably plunged into a brutal civil war with the rebel Confederate states in the South. The initial, overconfident fervor of the Union early in the war received a harsh reality check in July 1861, when the Union Army suffered a humiliating and comprehensive defeat at the First Battle of Bull Run in Northern Virginia. This devastating loss not only shattered Northern illusions of a quick victory, but also inadvertently set the stage for a controversial business transaction that would later become known as the Hall-Carbine affair. Following direct orders from President Lincoln to take the offensive against the Confederates, General John C. Fremont, the commander of the Western Department, found himself in desperate need of firearms for his rapidly expanding forces. His New York agent, Simon Stevens, discovered that an individual named Arthur Eastman somehow possessed 5 .00 obsolete Hall-Carbine rifles. Stevens quickly offered to buy these rifles for $12.50 each, with the intent to refurbish them and then resell them to Fremont's command for a significantly inflated price of $22 each. Fremont, blinded by the urgency of his need, unwisely agreed to the terms, completely oblivious to the fact that these rifles already legally belonged to the United States government. Designed in the 1810s by John Hall and produced between the 1820s and 1840s, using then pioneering mass manufacturing techniques, the Hall carbines were surplus leftover from the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 and were widely considered obsolete by 1861. In May, U.S. Ordnance Chief James W. Ripley, inexplicably, had agreed to sell them to Eastman for a paltry $3.50 apiece, but Eastman did not possess the $17.500 required to pay the government, nor did Stevens have the $62.500 needed to purchase them from Eastman. It was at this critical juncture that Stevens approached J.P. Morgan, who was by now trading successfully on his own account as Pierpont Morgan & Co. Morgan, with his characteristic acumen, swiftly financed the deal with a $20 US loan, securing his position as the linchpin of the transaction. Under the meticulously crafted terms of the agreement, the rifles remained legally in Morgan's name until Eastman could arrange for their necessary alterations and formally transfer them to Frémont's command. However, the refurbishment work took considerably longer than anticipated, and by the end of August, only half of the rifles had actually been sent to Frémont's forces. At this point, having received his substantial payment from Frémont's ordnance officer, Morgan, ever the shrewd operator, shrewdly removed himself from the deal. He walked away with a considerable profit of over $26 after charging a hefty 9% interest on his loan and an astounding commission exceeding 25%, a clear demonstration of his early mastery of financial leverage and risk management. Pierpont's timely exit was also driven by personal urgency, as Amelia Sturgis had accepted his marriage proposal in August 1860, and their wedding was imminently scheduled for October 1861. Although Amelia had been suffering from persistent poor health, Pierpont, ever hopeful, promised his prospective bride that her condition would miraculously improve once they embarked on their Mediterranean honeymoon. Painting a picture of optimistic denial, the couple married on October 7, 1861, in a modest ceremony at the Sturgis family's elegant New York house, surrounded by loved ones. Just 2 days later, they embarked on their transatlantic voyage, a journey intended for healing and celebration. During a brief stopover in Paris, Pierpont, concerned by Amelia's continuing frailty, took her for a medical examination. It was there, in a moment of devastating clarity, that he received the heartbreaking diagnosis. His beloved wife was dying from tuberculosis, a terminal illness, in a testament to his protective nature, or perhaps his struggle to accept the inevitable. Pierpont tragically kept the grim diagnosis to himself. He then took Amelia to Algiers, at the time a French colony known for its salubrious climate, desperately hoping to nurse her back to health against all odds. But her condition, alas, deteriorated even further throughout December, crushing his hopes. In mid-January, the devoted couple made their way back across the Mediterranean to Nice, a picturesque city on the French Riviera. It was there, on the morning of February 17, 1862, that Amelia finally succumbed to her illness, leaving her husband distraught and heartbroken at her bedside. Though Pierpont would eventually remarry 3 years later, the poignant memory of his first wife remained profoundly important to him throughout his life, a testament to their deep bond. He continued to make annual, solemn visits to her grave in Fairfield, Connecticut, a private pilgrimage to honor his lost love. Pierpont remained in Europe for 2 months, consumed by grief for Amelia, before finally returning to New York in early May. During his absence, he had entrusted his cousin, Jim Goodwin, to manage his burgeoning business affairs in New York, a testament to his growing entrepreneurial responsibilities. Upon his return, he formalized this trust by making Goodwin a junior partner in his firm. Concurrently, his father, Junius, strategically transferred Peabody's accounts from Duncan, Sherman & Co. to his son's newly established firm, further consolidating the family's financial operations under Pierpont's direct purview. The profound disruption in crucial cotton markets and the significant halt in railroad construction, both direct consequences of the devastating Civil War, had a major, albeit complex, impact on the Morgan's banking operations. Traditional avenues of finance were choked, yet father and son, with their characteristic entrepreneurial spirit, worked closely together to exploit new opportunities arising from the wartime economy. For instance, the value of U.S. government bonds fluctuated wildly in direct response to the ever-changing developments on the battlefield, presenting both immense risk and potential for profit. In London, Junius had astutely capitalized on the precipitous collapse in U.S. government securities following the Union Army's humiliating defeat at the First Battle of Bull Run, making a substantial profit when the Union forces decisively defeated Robert E. Lee's advance on Washington at the Battle of Antietam in September 1862. causing bond prices to rally. Similarly, when General Ulysses S. Grant secured the pivotal surrender of the Confederate forces at Vicksburg at the beginning of July 1863, a turning point in the war, Pierpont, demonstrating his keen understanding of market timing, swiftly dispatched a coded telegram to his father via the fastest route possible through Nova Scotia. This crucial message arrived just in time for Junius to strategically buy American securities before they rallied sharply on the momentous news of the Union victory. Securing another significant gain for the firm, the Union victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg were indeed decisive turning points, tilting the war irrevocably in favor of the North. Pierpont, having been drafted into military service after Gettysburg, made a pragmatic choice that was common among the wealthy of his era. His patriotism did not, apparently, extend to risking his own life on the battlefield. Instead, he paid the substantial sum of $300 for a substitute to serve in his stead. In October 1864, George Peabody finally fulfilled his long-standing promise to retire, formally ceding control of his influential London bank to Junius Morgan. However, Peabody, who had significantly expanded his philanthropic activities during the Civil War, unexpectedly went back on his earlier promise to allow Junius to continue using his esteemed name and, crucially, his considerable capital. This forced Junius to reconstitute the firm under a new identity, thus creating J.S. Morgan & Co., a significant moment of independence and branding. This change also led to a strategic shakeup in New York, as Junius shrewdly hired Charles Dabney, the very cousin of Pierpont's Azorean host, to join his son as a senior partner, forming the new entity of Dabney, Morgan & Co., further cementing the family's influence on both sides of the Atlantic. In May 1865, Pierpont married his second wife, Frances Louisa Tracy, the 23-year-old daughter of a prominent New York lawyer. While the marriage regrettably proved to be an unhappy one, a poignant contrast to the profound love he felt for Amelia, the couple nonetheless had a family, welcoming 3 daughters and a son, J.P. Morgan Jr., affectionately known as Jack, who would eventually follow in his illustrious father's footsteps. After Peabody's retirement, father and son continued their remarkably close and effective working relationship, with Junius making annual visits to the U.S. in the autumn and Pierpont traveling to London each spring, ensuring a seamless, transatlantic flow of business and strategy. With the conclusion of the American Civil War in 1865, the Morgans swiftly pivoted back to the lucrative commodities trade, dealing extensively in American cotton, a vital post-war export, and investing heavily in the rapidly reconstructing railroad industry. Their portfolio also diversified into more exotic commodities, including tobacco from the distant Philippines, aromatic coffee from Brazil, and fine tea from China, reflecting their increasingly global reach. This broader period, spanning from the Panic of 1837 to the Panic of 1913, is often colloquially known as the baronial age in American economic history, a time when powerful bankers like the Morgans could single-handedly make or break industrial giants and, through their immense financial leverage, even dictate terms to kings and parliaments across the world. Although J.S. Morgan & Co. was undeniably the largest and most influential American bank in London, its working capital remained a mere fraction of the colossal resources commanded by the major European banking houses, such as Baring Brothers in London or the legendary Rothschilds, whose sprawling empire stretched across the entire continent, wielding unparalleled power. The Rothschilds, for instance, had famously financed the British Army during both the Peninsula and Crimean Wars, demonstrating their immense state-level influence, while Barings had underwritten the monumental Louisiana Purchase for the United States in 1803, and later financed the hefty indemnity imposed on France after Napoleon's final defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Junius Morgan, keenly aware of this disparity, was desperate to significantly build up his capital reserves, aspiring to orchestrate such high-profile, nation-shaping financings himself. However, his inherently cautious approach and a deep-seated desire to preserve his existing, hard-won capital often dissuaded him from taking truly major, high-stakes risks. An extraordinary opportunity, however, presented itself during the Franco-Prussian War. Prussian troops, employing superior military tactics, decisively defeated the French army at the Battle of Sedan on September 2, 1870, capturing Emperor Napoleon III in the process, a stunning blow that reshaped European power dynamics. The French political elite, reeling from the defeat, swiftly deposed the emperor, proclaimed a new republic, and established a provisional government in Tours with the defiant intent to continue the fight against the Prussians. When this desperate new French government sought crucial financing from London, the Rothschilds, ever shrewd, cautiously believed that the beleaguered French would ultimately default on any loans. Meanwhile, Baring brothers, keen to maintain their long-standing and valuable relationship with the ascendant Prussian government, strategically declined to get involved. Yet, despite his usual advice to his son about making prudent and conservative loans, Junius, seeing a unique blend of opportunity and necessity, made a bold, uncharacteristic decision. He offered to underwrite a massive bond issue worth an astounding $10 million for the French, recognizing that he did not possess the sole capital to underwrite such an enormous sum on his own. Junius ingeniously formed a syndicate, inviting other banking houses to share the underwriting risk, an early example of collaborative finance on a grand scale. He offered these bonds at a steep 6% interest rate over 34 years, reflecting the high risk involved. The French, facing an existential crisis, found the terms of the Morgan loan humiliatingly severe, but in their dire circumstances, they had no other choice but to accept. The remarkably high rate proved to be more than justified in early 1871, when Paris was besieged and eventually taken, first by the victorious Prussians, and then tragically convulsed by the revolutionary Paris Commune, plunging the city into chaos. During this period of extreme instability, the price of the French bonds plummeted. Junius, in a daring and desperate move to protect his investment and the integrity of the syndicate, almost bankrupted himself by buying up large quantities of the falling bonds, single-handedly propping up their price and preventing a complete collapse. The eventual defeat of the Paris Commune in May saw a return to stability and, crucially, the bonds quickly recovered their full value. And when the French government, surprisingly, paid back the bonds ahead of schedule in 1873, Junius Morgan, through his audacious gamble and steadfast resolve, earned a net profit of over $1 million, a resounding triumph that dramatically elevated his firm's standing and solidified his reputation as a truly formidable player on the international financial stage. The sum of $5 million solidified his position, vaulting him into the inner sanctum of London's financial elite. This windfall also supplied the crucial capital that Parent J.P. Morgan needed to aggressively expand his burgeoning operations across the Atlantic, where America's railroad industry was experiencing a fervent resurgence, fueled by the accelerating pace of post-war reconstruction. Indeed, by 1869, the 32-year-old Parent was ready to assert his formidable financial power, first demonstrating it during a contentious battle for control over the strategically important Albany and Susquehanna rail line in New York State. Though a relatively modest regional route, the Albany and Susquehanna had attracted the predatory gaze of Jay Gould, the notorious railroad magnate, who envisioned incorporating it into his sprawling, often tumultuous, Erie railroad empire. Gould, known for his ruthless tactics and insatiable appetite for control, swiftly began accumulating shares in the company, his ultimate aim being to oust its respected founder, Joseph Ramsey, from the board of directors. Facing an existential threat, Ramsey bravely pushed back, but realizing he needed a powerful ally, he turned to Parent Morgan. Morgan, ever alert to opportunities that could cement his influence, immediately purchased 600 shares, a move that publicly challenged Gould's aggressive stake. Leveraging his growing network and strategic acumen, Parent secured the support of a sympathetic judge who, in a swift legal maneuver, helped Ramsey expel Gould's appointees and successfully regain control of the company. Morgan then shrewdly advised Ramsey to merge the newly secured line with the friendly Delaware and Hudson Railroad, a move that promised stability and strategic alignment. By February 1870, Morgan's intervention had paid dividends for himself as well. He secured a coveted seat on the board of directors of the combined entity, further strengthening the crucial, long-term relationship between his banking house and its vital railroad clients. In 1871, a significant shift occurred within Morgan's professional life as Charles Dabney retired, leading to the dissolution of the Dabney-Morgan partnership. Seizing this opportunity for further expansion, Junius Morgan extended an invitation to the immensely wealthy and influential Philadelphia banker, Anthony Drexel, to join his rapidly expanding banking empire. Consequently, Perrant was entrusted with managing a brand new, powerful partnership in New York, officially named Drexel, Morgan & Company, while Perrant's personal investment in this new partnership was a mere fraction of the $7 million commitment put forth by Drexel and his brothers. Junius, ever the shrewd and supportive father, augmented his son's stake with an additional $5 million of his own capital, ensuring Perrant's commanding position. However, rather than immediately diving into the demanding new enterprise, Perrant embarked on an extensive, restorative journey, traversing the cultural capitals of Vienna and Rome before venturing into the ancient wonders of Egypt. This lengthy sabbatical was a deliberate effort to rejuvenate his physical and emotional health, a testament to the immense pressures he faced even at this stage of his career. Shortly after Perrant's return to New York in 1873, Drexel, Morgan & Co. strategically relocated its offices to the bustling corner of Wall Street and Broad Street, an address that symbolically faced the New York Stock Exchange on one side and an important U.S. Treasury building on the other, a powerful declaration of its central role in the nation's financial landscape. That very same year, the U.S. government faced a daunting task, refinancing $300 million in Civil War debt at more favorable, lower interest rates. This was a monumental undertaking, and the government's previous success in wartime bond sales had largely been orchestrated by Drexel's Philadelphia rival, Jay Cooke, often hailed as the financier of the Civil War for his masterminding of federal government bonds. However, Cooke's formidable reputation had begun to wane in the early 1870s, severely impacted by the catastrophic collapse of his speculative investments in the Northern Pacific Railroad. Desperate, Cooke brought the globally renowned Rothschilds into his syndicate to secure the refinancing deal. In a swift countermove, Drexel, Morgan & Co. forged its own formidable rival syndicate, strategically including the venerable Baring brothers, a pillar of British finance. Drexel also shrewdly leveraged his personal friendship with Ulysses S. Grant, the revered Civil War commander who had ascended to the presidency in 1869. The influence of this connection proved decisive. The U.S. Treasury ultimately opted for a politically astute compromise, awarding half of the massive bond issue to each syndicate. Meanwhile, the Grant administration itself was reeling from a devastating corruption scandal, the Credit Mobilier affair, which exposed illicit dealings and inflated pricing in the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad. This public betrayal further eroded fragile investor confidence in American securities. Coupled with a deepening economic downturn already sweeping across Europe, these factors created a perfect storm that prevented Jay Cooke from securing the vital financing he desperately needed to keep his embattled bank solvent after his crippling losses on the Northern Pacific. Cooke's spectacular bankruptcy in 1873 sent shockwaves through American financial markets, immediately triggering a widespread financial panic that saw the New York Stock Exchange close its doors for an unprecedented 10 days. Amidst the chaos, Perrant Morgan, demonstrating his astute foresight and robust financial planning, decisively called in his outstanding loans. This defensive, yet aggressive, strategy not only allowed Drexel, Morgan & Co. to survive the crisis unscathed, but also to emerge from the turbulent year with over $1 million in profit. Cooke's dramatic downfall effectively cleared the field, leaving Drexel, Morgan & Co. poised as the single most powerful and solvent bank in the nation. At 36, Perrant Morgan was no longer just a promising financier. He was firmly on his path to becoming arguably the most renowned banker in American history. Even as the nation plunged into a severe and prolonged depression that gripped the economy from 1873 to 1879, The stark lessons of this downturn profoundly shaped Morgan's future philosophy. He vowed to prioritize lending exclusively to companies possessing robust balance sheets, meticulously avoiding the kind of speculative, high-risk ventures that had characterized some of his earlier, more adventurous forays into banking. He also acutely recognized that the relentless, often ruinous, cutthroat competition rife within the burgeoning railroad industry was a direct catalyst for widespread bankruptcies, a systemic flaw he would later dedicate his considerable power to rectify. As Parent Morgan's stature and influence inevitably grew over the ensuing decades, he cultivated a unique and potent reputation as a formidable, yet stabilizing, restraining influence in an era largely defined by its unbridled, often chaotic, capitalism. The prestige of Drexel, Morgan & Co. further ascended in 1877 when JP undertook the underwriting of payments for U.S. Army soldiers, famously accepting a meager 1% commission. This seemingly charitable gesture toward the government was a shrewd public relations move, fostering trust and goodwill, and was increasingly accompanied by Morgan's visible commitment to philanthropy and his burgeoning engagement with the arts. In 1876, Junius Morgan, with a keen eye for artistic excellence, arranged to acquire Thomas Gainsborough's universally acclaimed portrait of the Duchess of Devonshire for the considerable sum of $50 in demonio, intended as a lavish gift for his son. However, in a twist that captivated the art world, the painting was infamously stolen from the art dealer before the purchase could be finalized, vanishing without a trace. When it miraculously resurfaced in 1901, Parent, driven by both his passion for art and a profound sense of filial duty, paid an astonishing $150 for it, a poignant tribute to his late father's original, generous gesture. Beyond this personal acquisition, Parent Morgan evolved into a transformative patron of America's great cultural institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the American Museum of Natural History, channeling his immense wealth into their growth. His philanthropic endeavors also extended to supporting hospitals and numerous religious causes across the United States. In late 1877, Junius Morgan transitioned into semi-retirement, a pivotal moment that truly allowed Parent to fully emerge from his father's considerable shadow and forge his own undisputed legacy. In 1879, a monumental opportunity arose when the powerful Vanderbilt family approached J.P. with a request to float a massive block of shares in their flagship enterprise, the New York Central Railroad. The formidable family patriarch, Cornelius the Commodore Vanderbilt, had passed away in 1877, bequeathing his vast railroad empire to his son, William Henry Vanderbilt, who, in turn, became the wealthiest man in the country. After enduring a period of intense public and congressional scrutiny over the family's management practices and perceived monopolistic control of the railroad, William Henry prudently decided to divest a significant portion of his holdings, opting to sell 250 shares, and he specifically entrusted Parent Morgan to orchestrate their successful market placement. Parent's intricate challenge was nothing less than to liquidate this colossal block of shares, $250,000, without triggering a devastating collapse in the New York Central's stock price, a feat requiring immense skill and delicate handling. He meticulously organized a powerful syndicate of investors, carefully selected to acquire the shares at market prices, ensuring stability. Simultaneously, his father, Junius, played a crucial role from London, taking on 50 shares to strategically sell to eager European investors, leveraging the family's deep transatlantic connections. Wall Street, accustomed to dramatic financial plays, was nonetheless astounded when Parent triumphantly announced that he had successfully placed every single share. He emerged from this monumental transaction not only with a staggering commission of $3 million, but also with a highly influential seat on the New York Central's board. He shrewdly utilized this position to represent the interests of the more conservative, stability-seeking London investors, thereby gaining direct influence over one of America's most critical rail lines. While these transatlantic arrangements did raise some whispers about Parent's patriotism in certain circles, His undeniable success in managing the New York branch of the family banking empire solidified his reputation and marked a clear milestone. He was now in the process of demonstrably surpassing his father's venerable London enterprise in scope and influence. Perrant's burgeoning wealth was further reflected in his personal life, allowing him to acquire a magnificent mansion at 219 Madison Avenue. This grand residence became a symbol of modern luxury, notably holding the distinction of being the very first house in New York City to be illuminated by Thomas Edison's revolutionary light bulbs in 1882. This was no mere coincidence, as Perrant had been among the visionary financial backers of the Edison Electric Illuminating Company as early as 1878. Furthermore, the Drexel, Morgan & Co. office on Wall Street had itself been a pioneer, standing as the first commercial property to draw electricity directly from Edison's groundbreaking central power station, underscoring Morgan's keen eye for transformative technology and his willingness to invest in the future. Yet, despite his immense wealth and his entrenched position within New York's banking aristocracy, Perrant Morgan's private life often remained profoundly unhappy. His wife, Frances Fanny Morgan, was a shy and reserved woman who demonstrably did not share her husband's towering social ambitions or his relentless drive for public engagement. From 1878 onwards, Frances ceased accompanying Perrant on his annual, socially significant trips to London, and her absence, sadly, created a void that encouraged him to increasingly engage in extramarital affairs while abroad. In 1882, seeking both pleasure and a discreet venue for his varied pursuits, Perrant acquired a magnificent yacht, which he proudly named the Corsair. On board this luxurious vessel, he would entertain his mistresses with lavish abandon. But the Corsair was just one piece of a life lived in staggering excess. Morgan was a man of gargantuan appetites, known for consuming a breakfast large enough to kill a horse, typically featuring eggs, meat, and several servings of fish, all washed down with massive quantities of sherry and port. He moved through the Gilded Age like a modern-day Medici, obsessively amassing a fortune in artifacts that included Napoleon's watch, Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, and even a 5-page letter from George Washington. However, the Corsair served a dual, equally crucial purpose. It became a highly effective and confidential setting for resolving complex commercial disputes, far from the prying eyes of the press and public. It was in this capacity that Perrant earned widespread accolades for skillfully brokering a truce between the fiercely competing New York Central and Pennsylvania railroads. Their bitter rivalry had escalated over the controversial construction of the West Shore Railroad, a new line deliberately designed to run parallel to the New York Central, hugging the opposite bank of the Hudson River. The New York Central had correctly deduced that its formidable rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad, was the financial force behind this audacious West Shore enterprise, a direct challenge to its dominance. In retaliation, the New York Central immediately commenced work on its own South Pennsylvania Road, a strategic move aimed at connecting Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, thereby threatening Pennsylvania's core territory. This fierce, mutually destructive conflict sent the securities of both companies into a precipitous plunge, inflicting severe financial damage. By 1885, with both railroad titans badly bruised and bleeding financially, Perrant Morgan extended an invitation to the presidents of the feuding railroads to meet him on board the Corsair for urgent, high-stakes negotiations. By that very evening, thanks to Morgan's masterful mediation, the railroad magnates had hammered out an agreement to halt their mutually destructive competition, bringing a tentative peace to the embattled industry. Meanwhile, a growing public outcry over the widespread practice of rebates, secret discounts offered by the larger railroads to powerful clients like John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil or Andrew Carnegie's burgeoning steel empire spurred Congress to pass the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, attempting to outlaw these unfair practices. However, when the federal legislation proved largely ineffective in curbing the railroads' competitive excesses, Perrant Morgan once again stepped into the breach. He summoned railroad executives from across the country to New York for two pivotal meetings in December 1888 and January 1889. Under Morgan's decisive leadership, they formed the Interstate Commerce Railway Association, an audacious attempt at self-regulation intended to establish reasonable rates and impose penalties on offenders. Yet, despite Morgan's formidable influence, this agreement, along with a subsequent effort to regulate Western railroads in December 1890, swiftly collapsed. The inherent challenges of enforcing a cartel, especially against smaller, aggressive competitors operating outside the established structure, proved insurmountable. Nevertheless, despite these initial setbacks in achieving industry-wide cooperation, Perrault had unequivocally established himself as the preeminent mediator and stabilizing force of American business, a reputation that would only deepen with time. In April 1890, the 77-year-old Junius Morgan met a tragic end, thrown from his carriage when his horses were spooked by a passing train. A poignant irony for a family so deeply entwined with the railroad industry. His father's death left the 53-year-old J.P. Morgan with an astounding fortune of $25 million and full command of a vast Anglo-Atlantic banking empire, cementing his position as one of the world's financial titans. Although he prudently conserved the majority of his inheritance, Perrault utilized a portion of it to begin assembling what would ultimately become the world's largest and most prestigious private art collection, a testament to his refined aesthetic sensibilities. Junius's passing also formally positioned Perrault's 23-year-old son, Jack, as the new heir apparent to the illustrious House of Morgan. Though the relationship was complex, Perrault, who had deeply resented his own father's often controlling tendencies, perhaps overcompensated by maintaining a certain emotional distance from his own son, and neglect that Jack reportedly complained about to his mother. Jack, initially reluctant to follow in his powerful father's formidable footsteps, nonetheless accepted his destiny, becoming a partner in the prestigious Morgan banks across New York, Philadelphia, and Paris by 1892. A further significant reorganization of the banking empire soon followed the unexpected death of Anthony Drexel in June 1893. Although Drexel's son, Anthony Drexel Jr., initially inherited control of the Philadelphia and Paris operations, he chose to retire just a few months later in October 1893, opening the door for J.P. Morgan to fully consolidate his power. Thus, in a defining move in 1895, Drexel, Morgan & Co. was officially rebranded as J.P. Morgan & Co., emblazoning Perrault's name at the very pinnacle of the firm. While the Philadelphia branch strategically retained the venerable Drexel name, Perrault promoted the capable Edward Stotesbury to head that office. J.S. Morgan in London, the original family enterprise, also kept its name, but it was now Perrault who stood as the undisputed senior partner of all four interwoven enterprises, entitled to a commanding 35% share of their combined profits, a reflection of his ultimate authority and vision. Perrault Morgan now presided over an immense and intricate financial organization, a sprawling network that, realistically, he could not effectively manage alone. Yet, in a paradox that defined much of his leadership, he was an inveterate micromanager, one who perpetually struggled with the art of delegation. He famously insisted on personally auditing the company's books at the beginning of every year, a meticulous, hands-on approach that spoke to his deep distrust of anything less than total oversight. While the soaring American economic expansion at the close of the 19th century allowed J.P. Morgan to generate robust returns on capital, thereby strengthening its formidable balance sheet, the bank truly thrived and dramatically increased its power during periods of economic crisis, leveraging that very same balance sheet to strategically acquire and consolidate failing firms at bargain prices. The Panic of 1893 not only proved to be one of the most severe economic depressions in U.S. history, but it was also tragically interwoven with intense industrial strife. This era witnessed the brutal Homestead strike against Carnegie Steel in 1892 and the paralyzing Pullman strike against the railroad companies in 1894, while the nascent labor unions were ultimately defeated in both instances, brutally suppressed by a combination of corporate power and state intervention. The Depression itself claimed a staggering toll, engulfing some 15 EU commercial enterprises and over 600 banks in its wake of bankruptcies and ruin. Against this backdrop of economic turmoil, Drexel, Morgan & Co. had already demonstrated its visionary leadership in 1892 by actively encouraging the consolidation of the burgeoning electric power industry. They masterminded the merger of the Edison General Electric Company with Thomson-Houston Electric, a monumental union that ultimately gave birth to General Electric, when even this industrial giant, General Electric, found itself in perilous financial difficulty during the depths of the Panic of 1893. Parent Morgan, true to his role as a financial savior, stepped in with critical rescue financing. When Tesla approached Morgan with his dream of the Wardenclyffe Tower, a system to transmit free, wireless energy to the world, Morgan initially saw a monopoly. But when he realized that wireless power meant he couldn't put a meter on it to charge customers, his support vanished overnight. He didn't just stop the funding, he effectively blacklisted one of history's greatest inventors. To Morgan, innovation was only valuable if it could be controlled, measured, and most importantly, invoiced. This cold pragmatism defined the era. Progress was welcome, but only on the House of Morgan's terms. However, Morgan's vision for the future was strictly defined by monopoly and profit, a reality that the genius Nikola Tesla learned the hard way. In 1900, Morgan invested $150 in Tesla's Wardenclyffe station, hoping for a transatlantic wireless communication system to beat Marconi. But when Tesla revealed his true ambition, providing free wireless power to the entire world, Morgan abruptly cut off all funding. To Morgan, a technology that couldn't be metered or controlled was a threat, not a breakthrough, leaving Tesla's dream to rust away in the rain. This intervention not only averted GE's collapse, but also indelibly secured the loyalty and gratitude of General Electric's executives, forging a powerful, enduring alliance. The Panic of 1893 also presented Parent with yet another opportune moment to systematically rationalize the often chaotic operations of the American railroads. Having previously found informal cooperation between railroad executives elusive and ultimately ineffective, Parent now deployed his unparalleled financial firepower to directly seize control of bankrupt railroads himself. He achieved this through the innovative use of voting trusts entities that placed controlling shares in the hands of Parent and his trusted associates, effectively granting him operational command without outright ownership. With the substantial backing of savvy English investors who were keenly seeking more reliable returns after years of market volatility, J.P. Morgan ultimately ended up controlling an astonishing 1/6 of the entire American railway network. In a process soon famously labeled Morganization, Parent ruthlessly cut costs, forced reluctant creditors to accept lower interest rates on their debts, and even prevented railroad companies from engaging in non-core activities like extracting minerals from their vast land holdings, thereby keeping them laser-focused on their primary transportation operations. Throughout the 1890s, Morgan's strategic interventions profoundly reshaped the American railroad industry, which consolidated from a multitude of competing lines into 6 principal, highly organized groups, with Morgan himself in effective, if not outright, control of 4 of them. Then, in 1895, J.P. Morgan achieved what was perhaps the most remarkable and audacious feat of his career to date. He single-handedly ensured that the United States remained firmly on the gold standard. The U.S. government had formally adopted the gold standard in January 1879, backing up its promise of convertibility by committing to hold a minimum of $100 million in gold reserves at all times to guarantee the value of its currency. However, this gold standard, by strictly limiting the money supply, became increasingly unpopular, particularly among heavily indebted farmers in the agricultural regions of the South and West, who suffered from deflationary pressures, intense political pressure from the burgeoning free silver movement. A populist crusade advocating for the increased coinage of silver led to the passage of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890. This act compelled the U.S. Treasury to purchase a fixed amount of silver each month forward, 5 million ounces, and to issue new currency certificates that were theoretically redeemable in either gold or silver. This legislative ambiguity deeply alarmed British investors, who feared they might be repaid their substantial American investments in depreciating silver, thereby incurring significant losses. Already wary, British investors were simultaneously retreating from American assets, following a disastrous series of speculative bets on Argentinian assets that had gone sour in 1890, an international financial crisis that left the highly exposed Baring Brothers banking house on its knees, facing collapse. Although the Sherman Silver Purchase Act itself had been repealed in 1893, the lingering uncertainty surrounding America's monetary policy continued to plague markets, causing U.S. gold reserves to dangerously plummet below the critical $100 million threshold by 1894. By early February 1895, the outflow of gold had accelerated to such a perilous extent that the federal government teetered on the brink of default, a national catastrophe that would have shattered America's credit and standing on the global stage. While President Grover Cleveland, a steadfast New York Democrat, was a staunch advocate for the gold standard and desperately sought to replenish the depleted reserves, he failed to secure the necessary congressional approval for a public bond issuance, caught in a bitter political stalemate. And so, while Morgan hovered in the wings, fully aware that a private bailout by bankers would undoubtedly provoke a political firestorm and public outrage, he also understood the existential threat facing the nation. Despite President Cleveland's profound reservations about involving private financiers in such a sensitive matter, Morgan, displaying his characteristic audacity, famously barged into the president's Oval Office on February 5, 1895. He presented an extraordinary offer. His syndicate would gather an astounding 3.5 million ounces of gold, worth approximately $65 million, in exchange for a tranche of 30-year government bonds. Crucially, Morgan made a bold, additional promise to Cleveland. He guaranteed that this new gold would not immediately flow back out of the Treasury, effectively proposing to skillfully manipulate the international currency markets by strategically buying dollars and selling sterling whenever necessary to stabilize the exchange rate. Cleveland, cornered by the crisis, partially agreed to a slightly smaller loan, structured largely along the lines Morgan had outlined, a decisive move that, upon its announcement, immediately calmed the frantic markets. When the syndicate bonds were subsequently offered to investors in both London and New York, they were snapped up with astonishing speed. Fully subscribed within just 2 hours, this swift uptake allowed Morgan and his syndicate to bank a quick, substantial return on their high-stakes intervention. The immediate financial crisis was, for the moment, averted. Morgan's audacious intervention had indeed quelled the market turmoil and pulled the nation back from the precipice of default. Yet the underlying issue of the gold versus silver standard remained a festering source of intense political conflict for years to come. As the pivotal 1896 presidential election loomed, the Democratic Party nominated the populist firebrand William Jennings Bryan, the most prominent and passionate advocate for free silver. Bryan, with his electrifying oratorical skills, famously thundered against his opponents with the iconic declaration, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." In stark contrast, the Republican candidate that year was William McKinley of Ohio, whom Morgan not only supported financially with considerable contributions, but also vigorously encouraged to champion the gold standard as a cornerstone of his platform. McKinley's eventual victory in the election was widely seen as a powerful testament to Morgan's unparalleled financial power and pervasive political influence, which earned him the legendary nickname Zeus, or Jupiter, a direct reference to the ancient Greek and Roman kings of the gods, signifying his near-omnipotent status in the American firmament. Although Morgan privately expressed his opposition to McKinley's decision to launch the Spanish-American War in 1898, likely concerned about its disruptive potential to business, the swift American victory irrevocably brought some of Spain's last remaining colonial territories, namely Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines, under direct U.S. control. While some of these territories would eventually be granted nominal independence, others, like Guam and Puerto Rico, remain U.S. territories to this very day, reflecting America's burgeoning global reach. This strengthening of America's military power on the international stage was inextricably linked to the meteoric growth of its economic might. American enterprises, increasingly ambitious, began aggressively seeking international expansion. demanding vast amounts of investment capital and inevitably leading to the further consolidation of industrial companies into massive trusts. The Wall Street bankers, whose roles had traditionally been largely confined to financing the railroad industry and segments like textiles and steel, became absolutely instrumental in the formation of these colossal new trusts, orchestrating their mergers and securing their capital. Although Parent Morgan's immense power often made him deeply unpopular among the general public, who viewed him with suspicion and resentment, he paradoxically commanded absolute trust among businessmen who valued him as an indispensable and impartial broker in resolving complex disputes. And in a surprising alignment of interests, even some trade union leaders reluctantly conceded that these private industrial behemoths, despite their sometimes brutal labor practices, paradoxically offered a greater degree of certainty and security for workers than the myriad of smaller, often precarious businesses that perpetually teetered on the brink of insolvency, frequently cutting labor costs to the bone simply to remain viable. This widespread consolidation of American industry, driven by economic forces, also received tacit encouragement from President McKinley, who deftly led the pro-business wing of the Republican Party, fostering an environment conducive to such mega mergers. These consolidations left Morgan with a strategically significant stake in the rapidly expanding steel industry. By 1900, his own companies, Federal Steel and National Tube, were already established market leaders in the production of finished steel products. However, the landscape was about to be dramatically altered as Andrew Carnegie's formidable Carnegie Steel announced ambitious plans to expand beyond its core production of primary steel and aggressively enter the finished product market. Morgan, ever pragmatic, was determined to avert a ruinous and potentially catastrophic price war between his interests and Carnegie's titan. Charles M. Schwab, the brilliant and relatively young president of Carnegie Steel, shared this apprehension and was similarly unwilling to clash head-on with Morgan. In a fateful and historic dinner meeting in December 1900, Schwab proposed a truly audacious plan to Morgan to amalgamate fully half of the entire American steel industry into a single, colossal trust, with the vast Carnegie and Morgan interests forming its undisputed core. This monumental deal also necessitated the involvement of another financial titan, John D. Rockefeller, who held crucial iron mining and shipping interests in the Great Lakes region and, predictably, demanded a significantly higher price for his assets than Morgan had initially anticipated. After intense, intricate negotiations conducted directly with Morgan, Schwab returned to inform Carnegie, who had, with characteristic acumen, valued his company at an astonishing $480 million. Morgan, recognizing the historical significance and strategic imperative of the deal, accepted Carnegie's price without hesitation, offering his legendary rival a hearty congratulation on becoming, for a time, the richest man in the world. Though Carnegie would later famously express regret for selling his empire too cheaply, Morgan proceeded to orchestrate the financing of this unprecedented transaction by assembling a gargantuan syndicate of 300 underwriters, a testament to his unparalleled ability to mobilize capital. U.S. Steel was officially launched on April 1st, 1921, boasting an astronomical market capitalization of $1.4 billion, instantly making it the largest company ever listed on any stock exchange in the world. At a time when most market analysts conservatively valued stocks strictly at their book value, Morgan boldly justified this unprecedented valuation in terms of its projected future profitability and potential for growth, a forward-thinking approach that would later be vindicated. While Morgan's critics initially appeared vindicated when U.S. Steel's stock plunged from a peak of $55 in 1901 to a mere $9 by 1903, sending tremors through the market. Those astute investors who held onto their shares for the long term were ultimately amply rewarded. U.S. Steel, leveraging its immense economies of scale and strategic dominance, not only recovered but thrived spectacularly, particularly during and after the First World War. However, the very creation of U.S. Steel immediately ignited widespread public concerns about the dangers of monopoly and the alarming extent of Morgan's perceived control over the entire American economy. Following the monumental launch of U.S. Steel, Morgan, ever the Grand Seigneur, departed for a well-deserved vacation on the sun-drenched French Riviera. During his brief absence, however, the House of Morgan found itself embroiled in a titanic, high-stakes battle for control of the Northern Pacific Railway, a crucial Morgan-controlled railroad company that dominated the vast and lucrative Northwest. Morgan's formidable opponent in this epic struggle was Edward Harriman, another ruthless railroad magnate who already wielded immense power through his control of the Union Pacific Railroad. Harriman, a master strategist, painstakingly recruited two other financial giants to his cause, the powerful Rockefeller family and Morgan's fierce New York rival, Kuhn, Loeb & Co. With this formidable alliance in place, Harriman and his allies embarked on an aggressive campaign, secretly buying up shares in Northern Pacific. Morgan, initially caught off guard while vacationing, mistakenly interpreted the initial rally in Northern Pacific stock as mere market exuberance accompanying President McKinley's re-election, a sign of broader economic optimism. It was only when Northern Pacific shares skyrocketed to unprecedented levels in early May that Morgan's astute partners on the ground in New York suspected that a hostile takeover was underway. With Harriman on the verge of seizing controlling interest, Morgan, receiving urgent dispatches, issued unequivocal instructions: buy 150,000 shares at any price. As this desperate power struggle played out with breathtaking speed on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, Northern Pacific stock, in a legendary corner, spiked from a robust 143 points to an astronomical over 1,000 points in the space of just a few frantic days between May 7th and 9th. This unprecedented surge triggered a devastating short squeeze, as unprepared short sellers who had bet on the stock falling realized to their horror that Morgan and his allies were systematically buying up virtually all available outstanding shares, leaving them no way to cover their positions. The market, engulfed in panic, eventually crashed back down and stabilized, but not before thousands of investors, caught in the crossfire, had been financially wiped out. Ultimately, Morgan retained control of Northern Pacific, but the sheer chaos and devastating market impact of the Northern Pacific corner left an indelible mark. Morgan and Harriman eventually settled their intense dispute in November through further, strategically negotiated railway consolidation, once again demonstrating Morgan's preference for order over cutthroat competition. While President McKinley did not appear particularly concerned about the affair, the political climate in America underwent a profound and immediate transformation. When he was tragically assassinated in September 1901, he was instantly succeeded by his 42-year-old vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, a dynamic and progressive Republican who would embark on an 8-year tenure in the White House, defined by his vigorous challenge to the unchecked monopoly power of figures like Morgan and Rockefeller, ushering in an era of trust-busting. The House of Morgan soon found itself under heavy, concerted fire on both sides of the Atlantic. While Morgan's American critics often labeled him a creature of the City of London, implying undue foreign influence and a lack of national loyalty, British investors were simultaneously unnerved by the formidable threat posed by the colossal U.S. Steel to their own venerable British steel industry, which was struggling to compete. Indeed, by this stage, American steel production, thanks in part to Morgan's consolidations, was already considerably more efficient and dominant than its British counterpart. Likewise, Morgan's sophisticated banking operations had now definitively surpassed those of both the historic Baring brothers and the legendary Rothschilds. A stark demonstration of this shift in global financial power came during the Boer War in 1900, when the British government, in need of urgent funds, turned not only to the Rothschilds in London, but also, crucially, to J.P. Morgan in New York to issue new war debt. Morgan, demonstrating his unparalleled leverage, not only claimed half of the prestigious bond issue for his firm, but also shrewdly secured a higher commission from the British Treasury than even the Rothschilds. Then, in 1902, Morgan set his sights on financing what would become the Piccadilly Line of the London Underground, an ambitious attempt to extend his industrial and financial reach into the very heart of British infrastructure. Although his bid ultimately failed, Morgan's aggressive effort to muscle into such a symbolically significant project within the British Empire ignited widespread fears in London that he harbored plans to take over the city itself, seeing it as a direct threat to British economic sovereignty. Such growing anxieties were hardly assuaged when Morgan embarked on another bold venture, attempting to consolidate and control North Atlantic shipping by forming the International Mercantile Marine Company, IMM. This ambitious Anglo-American trust aimed to dominate transatlantic passenger and cargo traffic, incorporating Perrant's own extensive private fleet of 120 steamships, along with several other major passenger lines, including J. Bruce Esmé's famed White Star Line. Morgan further complicated the competitive landscape by breaking an existing agreement with major German steamship lines, effectively isolating the venerable Cunard Line as the primary independent shipping company outside the IMM's formidable grasp. In a direct response to this perceived threat of monopoly, the British government actively encouraged Cunard to maintain its independence, providing crucial subsidies for the construction of two magnificent, state-of-the-art liners, the Mauretania and the Lusitania, both designed to compete directly with IMM's fleet. This fierce competition with Cunard ultimately undermined the International Mercantile Marine Company, and Morgan found himself struggling to sell shares in what increasingly appeared to be an overvalued enterprise. In a pragmatic effort to reassure wary British investors and integrate more deeply into the London financial establishment, Perrant restructured his London bank, bringing on board influential British partners, most notably the exceptionally well-connected Edward Grenfell. Grenfell quickly became Morgan's crucial conduit to His Majesty's Treasury and the powerful Bank of England, bridging the Anglo-American financial divide. As a testament to this strategic realignment, in 1910, J.S. Morgan and Company was formally renamed Morgan Grenfell and Company. Meanwhile, back in the United States, J.P. Morgan found himself firmly and unequivocally in the crosshairs of President Theodore Roosevelt, capitalizing on the lingering public outcry and widespread indignation over the notorious Northern Pacific affair. In February 1902, President Roosevelt issued a direct instruction to Attorney General Philander Knox to initiate antitrust proceedings against Morgan's vast railway holdings under the powerful 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. The ensuing legal battle culminated in a landmark Supreme Court ruling in favor of the government in 1904, a significant blow to Morgan's perceived invincibility, while Morgan harbored deep fears that the progressive president would next pursue his other vast interests, particularly U.S. Steel. The two powerful figures found themselves in an unexpected, pragmatic cooperation in October 1902. They worked together to facilitate arbitration in the contentious anthracite miners' strike, which had paralyzed a group of Morgan-controlled railroads, demonstrating that even adversaries could collaborate in times of national crisis. Roosevelt was also notably grateful for Morgan's crucial financing of the monumental construction of the Panama Canal, after the U.S. government took over the ambitious project from the French in 1904, a testament to Morgan's indispensable role in major national undertakings. In response to the relentless public scrutiny and mounting pressure from the trust-busting era, Perrant Morgan gradually began to step back from the direct day-to-day management of his professional financial interests, consciously redirecting his immense energy and focus towards his burgeoning passion for art collecting and his increasingly public extramarital affairs. Indeed, his fervent passions for both women and art found a captivating convergence in the person of Belle de Costa Green, a brilliant and remarkably self-possessed 22-year-old woman whose extraordinary knowledge of rare books led Morgan to appoint her as the formidable librarian of the Morgan Library. This magnificent architectural jewel, built in the early 1900s, was designed to house his rapidly expanding and unparalleled art collection, while Morgan possessed a genuine and deep-seated interest in art, famously enjoying his visits to museums and galleries across Europe. His collecting habits also served a broader, strategic purpose. It was, in part, a grand display of American soft power, projecting national prestige and cultural sophistication on the global stage. He became an extraordinarily generous donor to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and after ascending to the presidency of its board in 1904, he appointed several of his equally wealthy and influential friends to support an ambitious and aggressive acquisition program, transforming the museum into a world-class institution. Although Perrault was renowned for bargaining hard and relentlessly with art dealers, his business acumen extending even to his aesthetic pursuits. His insatiable collecting habit meant that by the end of his life, his sprawling collection was valued at an astonishing $50 million, representing well over half of his entire estate. Despite his semi-retired status, Perrault Morgan's unmatched financial firepower proved indispensable once again, allowing him to single-handedly save the American financial system when markets spectacularly melted down in October 1907. This severe crisis, known as the Panic of 1907, specifically engulfed trust banks. These institutions, traditionally regarded as safe and conservative depositories for inheritances and estates held in trust, had, in recent years, succumbed to temptation and increasingly engaged in highly speculative and risky lending behaviors. The sudden, precipitous collapse in copper shares on October 21, 1907, acted as the direct trigger, causing a catastrophic run on the Knickerbocker Trust. This failure immediately shattered market confidence in all trust companies, unleashing a wave of fear that threatened to bring down the entire financial system. For 2 grueling weeks, the then 70-year-old Perrault Morgan, demonstrating an astonishing vigor and unwavering resolve, rushed around the city, tirelessly fighting financial fires, acting as a de facto central bank. While the Knickerbocker Trust's assets were too severely impaired for a viable rescue operation, Morgan, on October 23rd, masterfully mobilized a decisive $3 million to successfully save the more solvent and strategically important Trust Company of America, orchestrating the crucial bailout that ultimately stemmed the tide of panic. As the Panic of 1907 tightened its grip, the financial landscape of Wall Street became increasingly treacherous. A wave of aggressive loan recalls by trust companies, distinct from commercial banks and operating with less regulatory oversight, sent shockwaves through the market. These institutions, many heavily invested in speculative ventures, suddenly demanded repayment from scores of highly leveraged brokers. The sudden withdrawal of capital left these brokerages, the lifeblood of stock market transactions, desperately scrambling for liquidity, threatening a cascading collapse. It was into this maelstrom that J.P. Morgan, the towering figure of American finance, stepped on October 24th. Through sheer force of will and an unrivaled network of influence, Morgan summoned the city's leading bankers to his private library, orchestrating a critical emergency syndicate. He compelled them to collectively pledge an astounding $25 million, a gargantuan sum in an era without a central bank, to shore up the struggling brokerage houses and inject much-needed cash into the system, averting an immediate meltdown. Just 4 days later, on October 28th, Morgan's intervention was again required on an even grander scale as he single-handedly rescued New York City itself from imminent bankruptcy by providing a $30 million loan. The city, struggling with its own fiscal woes amidst the broader financial crisis, faced the humiliation and disastrous ripple effects of default, a fate narrowly avoided by Morgan's decisive action. Then, as the calendar turned to November, another precarious situation demanded his attention. On November 2nd, Morgan masterminded the 11th hour rescue of Moore and Schley. This prominent brokerage found itself dangerously overextended, holding a vast, illiquid block of Tennessee coal, iron and railroad company stock as collateral for its myriad loans, a position that, if forced onto the market, promised to trigger a far wider and more catastrophic systemic failure. The potential repercussions of a forced liquidation of Tennessee coal, iron and railroad company stock were dire, threatening to ignite a panic of unprecedented scale across the entire stock market, plunging the nation into a full-blown depression. Recognizing the imminent catastrophe, Morgan, with characteristic audacity, convened a marathon meeting over the weekend of November 2nd and 3rd. With the fate of the American financial system hanging in the balance, he meticulously engineered a complex and highly controversial solution. United States Steel Corporation, Morgan's own industrial behemoth, would acquire Moore and Schley's substantial holdings in Tennessee coal, thereby stabilizing its value and preventing a fire sale. This audacious maneuver, essentially consolidating power within a single trust, would under ordinary circumstances have been a direct affront to President Theodore Roosevelt's fervent trust-busting policies. Roosevelt, a champion of competition and a vocal opponent of monopolies, had built his political reputation on dismantling such powerful industrial combinations. Yet, faced with the undeniable reality of an impending national economic collapse, the fiercely pragmatic president, after receiving personal assurances from Morgan that this was the only viable path to stability, reluctantly granted his approval, allowing the extraordinary deal to proceed and underscoring the severity of the crisis. Morgan's unparalleled interventions during the Panic of 1907 solidified his image as the undisputed savior of the American financial system, a private citizen who had effectively acted as a de facto central bank in a time of dire national need. However, the very success of his private efforts simultaneously exposed a critical, dangerous flaw in the nation's financial architecture: the perilous absence of a centralized institution capable of providing liquidity during a crisis. This realization spurred a powerful political consensus that such an ad hoc arrangement, reliant on the good graces and immense power of one man, was unsustainable and unacceptable for a modern industrial economy. The Panic of 1907, therefore, became the pivotal catalyst leading directly to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. Ironically, the same year of Morgan's passing, in 1910, a group of the world's most powerful financiers boarded a private train under assumed names, traveling in total secrecy to a secluded hunting club on Jekyll Island. Their mission: to draft the blueprint for what would become the Federal Reserve. Though Morgan was not physically there, his shadow loomed over every sentence of the plan. They realized that the world had grown too large for one man to act as its lender of last resort. It was time to transition from the era of the one titan to the era of the system, an institutional version of Morgan's own power, baked into the very fabric of the U.S. government. This rescue led to a chapter straight out of a spy novel. In 1910, a group of titans led by Morgan's partner, Henry Davison, boarded a sealed railway car under aliases like Wilbur and Orville. Their destination, Jekyll Island. In total secrecy, they drafted the blueprint for what would become the Federal Reserve, ensuring that while Morgan the man might pass, the House of Morgan's DNA would remain at the heart of the world's most powerful central bank. This new institution was designed to formalize the role Morgan had temporarily filled, providing a stable, regulated lender of last resort. 2 years prior to this landmark creation, in 1909, when William Howard Taft succeeded Theodore Roosevelt in the presidency, Morgan harbored a quiet optimism. He anticipated that Taft, a fellow Republican, would usher in an era less characterized by Roosevelt's aggressive trust-busting and perhaps more sympathetic to the needs and interests of big business and industrial consolidation, allowing for a more predictable and growth-oriented economic environment. Morgan's hopes, however, were soon dashed. Far from easing the pressure on big business, President Taft, surprisingly, proved to be an even more vigorous trust-buster than his predecessor. His administration continued the antitrust campaign with an unwavering resolve, most notably in 1911 with the monumental Supreme Court order that dissolved John D. Rockefeller's colossal Standard Oil Company into 34 distinct, independent entities, a decisive blow against industrial concentration. Taft also courageously, albeit unsuccessfully, launched an antitrust suit directly against Morgan's crown jewel, U.S. Steel, signaling that even the most powerful industrial empires were not immune. Yet, despite this adversarial stance on domestic economic policy, Taft skillfully leveraged Morgan's unparalleled financial prowess for the nation's international ambitions. He effectively co-opted Morgan and a select group of other influential Wall Street financiers into a strategic partnership, enlisting their vast capital and global connections to advance American foreign policy interests, particularly in nascent global markets. A prime example of this dollar diplomacy in action was the ambitious initiative launched in 1909 J.P. Morgan personally spearheaded a formidable syndicate of Wall Street banks, marshaling immense financial resources to fund crucial railroad construction and vital currency reform efforts within the vast, emerging market of China. This undertaking was not merely commercial, it was a deliberate move to project American economic influence and assert its geopolitical standing in a region increasingly eyed by other global powers. However, the grand vision for American financial influence in China met an abrupt and ignominious end. The dramatic collapse of the Qing Dynasty in 1911, which plunged China into prolonged political chaos and civil unrest, irrevocably destabilized the entire venture. The syndicate's substantial investments in infrastructure and currency reform were suddenly rendered worthless or trapped in a volatile political landscape, transforming the ambitious enterprise into a costly and humiliating fiasco. Yet, even this significant financial setback paled dramatically when confronted with a human tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The catastrophic sinking of the RMS Titanic on the frigid night of April 15th, 1912. This monumental loss of life profoundly overshadowed any monetary loss. The Titanic itself was the ultimate maritime statement from J. Bruce Ismay's White Star Line, a direct and opulent response to the formidable success of its rival, the Cunard Line. With its record-breaking, luxurious liners, the Lusitania and Mauretania, White Star sought to reclaim supremacy not through speed, but through unprecedented scale, unparalleled luxury, and an aura of absolute invincibility embodied by the unsinkable Titanic. J.P. Morgan, the very embodiment of the financial might that built such a marvel, had personally attended the elaborate christening ceremony of the Titanic in Belfast in May 1911. He had even ensured he possessed a sprawling, opulent private suite, perhaps the most lavish on the entire vessel, ready for its inaugural journey. Indeed, Morgan was originally slated to be among the privileged passengers for the ship's maiden voyage in April 1912, a high-profile figure whose presence would have further burnished the ship's prestige. However, by a twist of fate, he canceled his reservation at the last minute, reportedly due to illness, narrowly escaping the catastrophe that would soon unfold. When news of the Titanic's tragic demise reached him, Morgan was reportedly devastated by the horrific loss of life. Yet, despite his personal grief, both he and White Star Line's managing director, J. Bruce Ismay, quickly became targets of intense public fury and scrutiny. They faced scathing criticism for allegedly prioritizing extravagant luxury and corporate grandeur over fundamental safety measures, particularly concerning the insufficient number of lifeboats on board and the perilous speed at which the ship was commanded through treacherous waters. The disaster served as a brutal indictment of unchecked industrial ambition. The Titanic disaster proved to be the ultimate, crushing blow to Morgan's ambitious International Mercantile Marine Company, his sprawling shipping trust sealing its fate. The immense public outcry, combined with the catastrophic financial implications and irreparable damage to its reputation, rendered the enterprise unsalvageable, leading to its eventual dissolution in October 1914. Simultaneously, the public's latent distrust of unchecked corporate power, exacerbated by the human cost of the Titanic and years of progressive era agitation, reached a fever pitch. Antitrust sentiment surged across the United States, culminating in a landmark investigation that underscored the nation's growing unease with the concentration of financial power. In December 1912, the House Banking and Currency Committee convened for what would become known as the Peugeot Committee hearings. Chaired by the tenacious Louisiana Democrat Arsène Peugeot, this high-stakes inquiry was specifically tasked with scrutinizing and exposing the alleged money trust, the perceived consolidation of financial control in the hands of a few powerful Wall Street bankers and institutions, sparking fears of an oligarchy. Summoned to testify before the formidable Peugeot Committee, the elderly but still formidable Morgan, ever the titan of finance, appeared as a defiant champion of American enterprise. With an air of unwavering conviction, he delivered a spirited defense of the established financial order, directly countering the committee's accusations of a money trust. His most memorable and iconic declaration came when he asserted that the true foundation of credit was not mere collateral or wealth, but rather the intrinsic character of an individual. He famously stated, with a dismissive wave, "Because a man I do not trust could not get money from me on all the bonds in Christendom." This powerful assertion underscored his personal, almost autocratic, approach to banking, where trust and reputation held paramount importance. However, the gravitas of his testimony was significantly undermined by his persistent and somewhat disingenuous insistence that neither he nor J.P. Morgan & Co. controlled any companies. This stark denial flew in the face of his widely acknowledged influence over a vast industrial empire, leading many to view his statement as an evasion designed to sidestep the legal implications of direct ownership, thus inadvertently reinforcing the very public suspicions about his pervasive, albeit often informal, control over American industry. Following the grueling ordeal of the Pujo Committee hearings, a visibly weary J.P. Morgan, accompanied by his daughter Louisa, embarked on a transatlantic journey in early 1913, seeking respite and solace in the warmer climes of British-controlled Egypt. It was a final, grand escape for the aging financier, perhaps hoping to outrun the intense public scrutiny and the relentless demands of his empire. Yet, his health, already fragile, deteriorated rapidly during this trip. Upon returning to Europe, the titan of finance finally succumbed to his ailments, passing away peacefully in Rome on March 31st, 1913, at the age of 75, a mere 9 months before the Federal Reserve Act, a direct consequence of the very financial instability he had so often personally mitigated, would be signed into law. J.P. Morgan, without doubt, remains one of the most iconic and consequential bankers in all of history. However, unlike his celebrated Gilded Age contemporaries, such as Cornelius Vanderbilt and Andrew Carnegie, who famously forged their vast empires from humble beginnings and sheer entrepreneurial grit, Morgan's path to unparalleled success was significantly paved by the formidable financial foundation laid by his father, Junius Spencer Morgan, whose influential banking operations had already established a powerful presence in both New York and London. From the late 1850s onwards, the younger Morgan embarked on a relentless mission to not just inherit, but dramatically amplify his family's financial legacy. He began to carve out his own formidable presence, expanding the Morgan banking business with aggressive and innovative strategies across the burgeoning American landscape. Concurrently, his father, Junius, continued to reap significant profits and bolster the firm's international prestige through monumental European initiatives, most notably orchestrating the substantial Morgan loan to the French government in 1871. This crucial financial injection came at a time when France was reeling from the devastating Franco-Prussian War, demonstrating the family firm's capacity for high-stakes international finance and sovereign lending. However, as the 1870s progressed, the balance of power within the family enterprise unmistakably shifted. J.P., with his distinct vision for American industrial development and an increasingly assertive personal style, began to assume full command, transforming the established banking house into a reflection of his own towering ambition and financial acumen. What truly distinguished J.P. Morgan was his uncanny, almost prescient, ability to identify and seize nascent market opportunities, coupled with a masterful command of financial strategy that, in its era, often bordered on market manipulation. His audacious yet meticulously calculated maneuvers, often involving the consolidation of fragmented industries and the restructuring of struggling enterprises, swiftly transformed his banking operations into a veritable wellspring of immense wealth. From this fortified financial base, Morgan strategically immersed himself in every foundational pillar of America's Gilded Age economy. He became the unparalleled force behind the vast railway consolidation, creating powerful, efficient networks from a chaotic tangle of smaller lines. He forged the monumental U.S. Steel Corporation, the world's first billion-dollar company, from numerous disparate entities. He built the ambitious shipping trust, the International Mercantile Marine, to dominate transatlantic commerce, and he wielded significant influence within the burgeoning oil industry. By the 1890s, Morgan was no longer merely a prominent banker. He was the undisputed giant of American finance, often referred to as Jupiter Morgan, effectively the Warren Buffett of his day, a visionary investor and crisis manager whose decisions profoundly shaped the national economy. He pioneered a clinical, almost surgical process known as Morganization. He would take dysfunctional, competing industries and forcefully consolidate them into massive, efficient trusts. But the masterstroke was his use of interlocking directorates. By placing his own partners on the boards of dozens of rival banks, railroads, and insurance companies, Morgan created a silent, invisible web of influence. He became the central nervous system of American capitalism, ensuring that while the faces of the companies changed, the brain behind the decisions remained exactly the same. But his dominance was also fueled by a fierce self-consciousness. Behind the piercing stare was a man hiding a bulbous, disfigured nose caused by rhinophyma, a condition he refused to treat for fear his childhood seizures might return. He was the master of early Photoshop, Dynasty, demanding every professional portrait be retouched to mask the purple monstrosity that crude taunters mocked in the streets. He was the indispensable figure to whom other struggling bankers, and even the President of the United States, instinctively turned for emergency liquidity and decisive leadership in times of dire financial peril. In moments of extreme tension, Morgan had a peculiar ritual, whether waiting for a president's answer or locking rival bankers in his library to force a deal. He would retreat into a game of solitaire. It was his way of finding order in chaos, a mental exercise that preceded some of the most world-altering decisions in financial history. It is for these extraordinary interventions that J.P. Morgan is justly remembered as the pivotal figure who, in 1907, single-handedly prevented a localized financial panic from spiraling into a systemic catastrophe akin to the devastating Wall Street crash of 1929 or the far-reaching Great Financial Crisis of 2008. His decisive, forceful actions, taken in the critical absence of a governmental lender of last resort, acted as an indispensable circuit breaker, preserving the integrity of the American financial system. Yet, Morgan's legacy extends beyond his financial wizardry. Much like his fellow titans of industry, such as Andrew Carnegie and the Vanderbilt dynasty, he understood the imperative of reinvesting vast personal wealth into cultural enrichment and philanthropic causes. A testament to this profound commitment is the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, which stands today as one of the world's preeminent cultural institutions. Originally conceived as his private library by a man of prodigious intellect and insatiable curiosity, it housed an unparalleled collection of rare books, manuscripts, old master drawings, prints, and ancient artifacts, reflecting his deep passion for art, history, and the written word. This remarkable institution endures as a public trust, a lasting embodiment of his vision to share beauty and knowledge with future generations. Beyond his personal life and cultural contributions, Morgan's business legacy remains extraordinarily potent and pervasive, indelibly etched into the fabric of global finance. The iconic Morgan name, far from fading into history, not only survives but actively thrives across the United States and indeed the world. Today, the colossal J.P. Morgan Chase & Co. stands as a universal banking powerhouse, a direct descendant of his original firm, offering a vast array of commercial banking, investment banking, and asset management services. To understand the sheer magnitude of this giant, one must look back to a ruse that predates Morgan himself. The Chase in J.P. Morgan Chase traces its roots to 1799, when Aaron Burr founded the Manhattan Company under the guise of providing clean water to New York to fight yellow fever. It was a clever legal loophole to create a bank that could challenge Alexander Hamilton's monopoly. Today, the bank still holds a grim relic of this founding rivalry, the very pistols Burr used to kill Hamilton in their 1804 duel. Yet, the House of Morgan's influence on global stability would eventually come full circle through a modern innovation. In the 1990s, a team at J.P. Morgan, led by a young executive named Blythe Masters, pioneered the credit default swap, a complex derivative meant to manage risk. In a chilling historical irony, the bank that saved the world in 1907 became the architect of the very instrument that would fuel the global financial collapse of 2008. A century later, that same spirit lives on in Jamie Dimon. In 2008, mirroring Morgan's 1907 intervention, Dimon used the firm's Fortress balance sheet to rescue Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual during the subprime meltdown. Even in 2023, the government turned to JP Morgan Chase once more to stabilize the system by acquiring First Republic, proving that the firm remains the lender of last resort in times of crisis. Alongside it, Morgan Stanley, another titan bearing his surname, has carved out its own distinct niche as a global leader in investment banking and wealth management. These two formidable institutions, both tracing their lineage to the singular vision and immense influence of JP Morgan, continue to command leading positions in the modern financial world, a testament to the enduring power and strategic foresight that define their progenitor. So, as we reflect on the monumental life and legacy of JP Morgan, a figure whose influence undeniably reshaped America, we are left to ponder the enduring questions surrounding his true character and impact. Was he, at his core, a visionary financial genius whose strategic interventions and unparalleled consolidations were absolutely essential in laying the robust groundwork for America's economic dominance in the 20th century? Or was he, as his critics often charged, a ruthless, power-hungry titan who skillfully leveraged the immense capital and established connections inherited from his father to systematically eliminate rivals, create monopolies, and ultimately enrich himself and his elite circle? Today, the House of Morgan has traded railroads for algorithms. With a staggering $18 billion annual technology budget, the bank is reinventing itself as an AI powerhouse. From Index GPT for personalized investing to the LLM suite that gives 250 E000 employees a digital assistant, the firm is racing to become the world's first fully AI-powered megabank, betting that intelligence, not just capital, will rule the next century. We invite you to share your thoughts and perspectives on this complex and endlessly fascinating historical figure in the comments section below. And until next time, thank you very much for joining us.